Bonjour, welcome to Wahsa Education Center's radio Zoom classes. This is SVN3E, grade 11 workplace science, and I'm the teacher, Bronwyn Slate. If you'd like to participate live today, you can call the Wahsa studio at 1-800-465-7144 or 737-4017. You can listen on the radio at 91.9 FM and on the television at Bell Express View Channel 972. You are always welcome to join me live through the Zoom link, which is available from me, your teacher, and also your DEC. Our classes are scheduled Monday through Thursday from 3 till 4 in the afternoon. And we are now wrapping up our 7th week of our 9-week course. So we only have 2 more weeks left to go. At this point, you definitely should be submitting work for marking. As I said, we have only 2 more weeks left to go in our course. All of your work is due by June 10th, which is only in 2 weeks. So it's really important that if you are going to complete your course this year, that you submit the work before June 10th. We don't have people marking in the summer, so it's not feasible to roll over into the summer. And if you only get part of your work in, then you'll have to resubmit that work in the fall if you are going to attempt this course again then. So if you want to get this credit this year, you need to get your work in the next 2 weeks. So of course, the work that you need to submit are all the key questions that are listed at the end of each of your lessons. So you need to do all of them that are listed. There are check your understanding questions. There are some activities. There are review questions. So please do all the questions that are listed, explaining all your thoughts, showing all of your work, making sure you're answering the question. You can do it either by hand or electronically. Either way is completely fine with me. As long as I can read it, I will mark it. If I can't read it, I will ask you questions. If you're going to write in your workbook, that's fine. Just they're very small spaces. And if you're going to do it electronically, Word and Google Docs are the easiest files for me to open. Everyone has access to Google Docs through their NNEC email address. I can support you if you want to do that and you don't know how. If you're going to use a different file type, I'm sure it's fine. Just reach out to me and so that we can communicate about to make sure that I can actually open the files. There are 3 different ways to submit your work. You can scan and send it electronically. If you have a smart device, you can scan using the iPhone Notes app or the Android Google Drive app. If that doesn't work for you and you prefer to take pictures, that is fine. The files are just a little bit larger and therefore a little bit harder to send, but it's not a big deal. Really, we can do it. Then you can send it either through email to studentwork@nnec.on.ca and CC it to bronwyn.slate@nnec.on.ca, or you can send it to me through Facebook Messenger at bslatewahsa. The second method is to drop your work off into Lookout. We have an outdoor mailbox at our 74 Front Street location, where the bright red building next to the post office. And we have a small white mailbox next to our side entrance. So you could just put it there at any time. We continue to be closed to the public. So even during office hours, please just drop it off in the box and I will get it and get it back to you as soon as I can. The third method is to hand your work into your DEC. Your DEC can either send your work through the Express or fax it to 807-737-1732 or toll-free fax to 1-800-463-7852. If you'd like to connect with me through social media, both my YouTube channel and my Facebook profile are under the name bslatewahsa. So you can find me there and friend me or subscribe if you'd like. This way you'll get notifications every time I upload one of our lessons. All of our radio Zoom classes are recorded and I upload them to YouTube. Generally a couple of days, within a couple of days of airing. I try to do as soon as I can, just sometimes things come up and it gets pushed down the to-do list. All of our classes are uploaded into a playlist called SVN3E, which is our course code. And there's also a list of supplementary videos there in terms of the videos that we watch in class. They're all listed there, so you can find them from their original sources. Science is really visual. I work really hard to integrate as many diagrams and visuals as I can, as well as videos, to really engage our whole brain. So I strongly encourage you to access the videos and not just listen on the radio. If you're going to join me live through Zoom, You don't have to talk to me if you don't want to. That is completely fine. It's reasonable to just watch and not engage or not talk to me. Totally fine if that's not comfortable. If you want to watch on YouTube, but you don't have access to a reliable internet source, let me know and I can send you a copy of the videos so that you can still access them and set yourself up for success. As always, if you have any questions or concerns of any sort, please reach out to me. My email address is bronwyn.slate, and that's spelled BRONWYN.SLATE@nnec.on.ca. My Facebook is B-Slate Wahsa. The phone of the office is 807-737-1488, and my extension is 2209. Or you can also call us toll free at 1-800-667-3703. My office hours are Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m., but I teach the first hour and the last hour of my day, so that's not a great time to try to get a hold of me. Again, just another reminder that June 10th is your last day to submit your coursework, and also that there's a culminating assignment that you need to complete as well by that date. So it would be best to have your work in so that you can get your culminating assignment, and if the sooner you get it in, the more likely I am to get it back to you so you can have it while you're doing your final project. I think it's important to position myself within the context of education, as my experience has shaped me as an educator, and that has come with certain privileges and challenges. I have white settler ancestry. I am a white person with white privilege, and that has definitely made my journey in education easier than many folks. I recognize that it's not just about the work that I put into, but the fact that there are certain expectations that were put on me and ways that I was taught in order to be successful. So I tried to disrupt that cycle by integrating as many Indigenous and Métis and Inuit experiences as well as other relevant experiences of people of the global majority into our course, but it is something that I'm learning to do better and better all the time. I do live in Northwestern Ontario on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe people, and I work to honor and recognize the wealth of knowledge in this community. And I'm learning how to integrate that into our course so that I can share that to our community members as well. This is my first time teaching this course, so I continue to have lots to learn and unlearn. I'm not perfect by any means, and there's much I can do to improve. So please feel free to share information with me if you have suggestions of how I can improve. Also, our textbook is problematic in the fact that it ignores Indigenous, Inuit, and Métis knowledges as well as experiences. This is a very Eurocentric book where all of the communities that are spoken about or the scientists are white and not acknowledging how those experiences are different than many other people's experiences in our world. So again, I acknowledge that, and I'm working towards trying to alter our perspective of how science should be taught and what is relevant and valuable in our education system. It's a work in progress. So today is a Throwback Thursday lesson. As we wrap up week 7, we're going to be focusing on lessons 14 through 19. In this course, there's a total of 23 lessons. So next week, we will be doing lessons 20 through 23, and we won't have a Throwback Thursday lesson, but the following week will be a review week where I will not teach any new material. We'll just be going back over the various units or chapters that we covered throughout the course to just do a recap to consolidate our learning as a whole. So obviously we're not reviewing, we've been reviewing consistently throughout the course, and at different moments it may have felt not practical or not useful, but the studies done by Herman Ebbinghaus in 1885 and other scientists since have shown that we forget information really quickly. So, and then we retain very little of it over as time continues on. So in order to avoid losing all the information, which is kind of the whole point of us being in the course, is to learn and keep information. We revisit our information frequently, as often as we can. Every week or 2 weeks, we come back to it to touch base on what we've been doing since the beginning of the course. And that really helps to solidify it and make it sit so that we don't forget it as rapidly. So first, we're going to go over the highlights of the course so far. We have covered up a lot of material. So lessons 1 through 19, that's a lot of material that we've covered. So this is going to be a bit of a quick overview of what the highlights are and what we remember from the course so far. And then we'll go through the support questions to some extent to just sort of touch base on those a little bit and figure out, just to talk about them a bit. So a reminder, all the way back to Unit 1. So this is our first week of our course. So 6 or 7 weeks ago, our lesson 1 was talking about the components of soil, water, and air. So we talked about how soil is made up, and we talked specifically about the porosity and how dense the molecules are in soil and how that affects the water and the air and other organic materials within the soil. We talked about water and how it is a universal solvent because it attracts anything that has polarity within the molecules and is able to pull them apart and dissolve those substances. And then we also talked about acids and bases and the pH level of different liquids and how that affects, or in order to later talk about how that affects other environmental factors. And we talked about air and how it's made up of various gases, specifically carbon, oxygen, nitrogen were the 3 largest components in our air, which then show up later in terms of how that is useful and how we use that. So in lesson 2, we talked about how our effects on human activity on soil, water, and air. And within soil, we talked about the ways that we destroy it, particularly looking at deforestation, where we clear out forests, urbanization, where we turn everything into cities, erosion, where we break down and remove the healthy, fertile parts of soil, introducing chemical fertilizers and pesticides, so introducing chemicals and toxins into the soil, and as well, so directly, and then also industrial chemicals indirectly, or that as waste, also we introduce that into the soil, which destroys it. Then we talked about water and how there's various ways that we pollute water. This can be dumping, or can be like oil spills, but also can be dumping chemicals into the water. It can be cleaning out of tanks of ships and recreational boats, tanks, and then that residue ending up in the water. And then also even like plastics in our household cleaners and such ends up in the water. And then finally, we talked about air in terms of burning of fossil fuels and how that has led to air pollution. And this is where we started talking about the greenhouse gas effect and how that is contributing to the climate crisis and really changing a lot of things for plants and animals and all of us, and how that eventually we are realizing how this is really potentially quite dangerous and going to lead to another extinction, mass extinction. And then lesson 3, we talked about the common methods of sampling and monitoring soil, water, and air. So we just talked about how they are measured and tested in order to be aware of how we are affecting them and how the changes that we are making. All right, so then unit 2, we talked about, in lesson 4, we talked about the cycling of substances in our ecosystems. So now we talked about how all of our systems are interconnected, and they have producers, consumers, and decomposers who work together to thrive and feed each other, but also deal with their wastes. And but it's a cycle, so they're all dependent on each other. Then we talked about how there's interconnected cycles of nutrients as well, and how oxygen, carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur all go through the producers, consumers, and decomposers and are shared among them at different times and how we use them in different ways. But again, we need these nutrients, and because of these systems, we're able to thrive and survive in our environments. And then we had one little case study focus on biosolids and how as humans, we are trying to improve our abilities as decomposers. We're really bad at being decomposers. And so biosolids is one way that we are learning about how we maybe can use our waste in an effective way, but there still are concerns in terms of if they are toxic or adding pollutants to things when we're attempting to grow food. Then in lesson 5, we looked at carbon footprints. And so this is our impact on the environment around us, our personal, community, country impact can be measured, or even corporation can be measured at different levels, and how we each produce greenhouse gas emissions, and that's different depending on who we are and what we do. So particularly, we noted how the white minority are the people who create the most of greenhouse gas emissions worldwide. And so places like Canada, United States, Australia, many European countries are creating the bulk of greenhouse gas emissions. And not saying that there are only white people who live in those countries, obviously, but those countries, the fact that they are like the colonizers and the wealth that has come historically from these places, and that is all connected to it, compared to the global majority, where people who are not white are not contributing as much greenhouse gases in countries around the world, yet they are having the greatest impact on them in terms of climate crisis and injustices, and they're more likely to be climate refugees and such, which is really problematic and concerning. The people who are being affected the most have no power to make changes, whereas the people who have all the power and all the are making the emissions are taking little responsibility and doing little to change. So this led us to talking about individual impact and structural change, and how, yes, there are things that we can do small and independently, which are important, but that it's also important to do structural change to really make a big difference, because it's about our governments and our corporations, not just about each of us turning off lights in our houses or using low flow toilets or things like that. Though those are good things to do, it's bigger than that. Then we talked about how human activity affects ecosystems, specifically looking at oil spills and acid precipitation. We looked at both in terms of how these affect both water and land, plants and animals, and how it can take up to decades for these ecosystems to recover based on the pollution that they experience, and that is really quite concerning. And then at the end of Unit 2, we talked about invasive species in Lesson 7. So how invasive species are have been brought in by humans moving around the world, and that means that they take over space that are and potentially annihilate the plants and animals that are native to an area, and that's again concerning. So then we talked about how these species are monitored and controlled through prevention, early detection and elimination, containment and management, and then finally ecosystem restoration, where we try to repopulate plants and animals in a certain area in order to restore the natural ecosystem order. All right, so then Unit 3, we looked at Lesson 8, which is common environmental factors. So here we looked at different types of pollution specifically. So we looked at the components of air pollution and how the particulate matter works, or carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, and nitrogen oxides, how they all contribute to air pollution. We talked about light and noise pollution and how, again, our activities are affecting our environments. And then we continue to talk about soil and water pollution in terms of the heavy metals, the workplace chemicals, and pathogens, which we'd mentioned before. Lesson 9, we talked about how these environmental contaminants enter our bodies and our systems. So we've talked about how the natural systems, we've talked about the effects of pollution and the effects of our actions, and how we have impacted the natural systems, and now we're talking about how in turn these systems are now impacting us because of our carelessness in our environments. So first we talked about how a bit of biology in terms of how our bodies work, looking at the respiratory, digestive, skin, and circulatory systems, and how then we looked about how our bodies can inhale, ingest, or absorb toxins, and then move them through our systems that work really well to move the nutrients and oxygen and things like that through our system. But they also can work well to move toxins through our systems if we're not careful. So our bodies do have some defense mechanisms to take care of our bodies, but they are limited and only can deal with small amounts of contaminants. And if they get dysfunctioned or they become exhausted, then we lose our defenses and we become more vulnerable. So then we talked about how our human body reacts to these environmental factors. So we talked about, again, the contaminants a little bit, and then what the reactions our bodies have, and the connected diseases, to see how those contaminants that we put into the environment then cycle through and affect us in the long run. From there, we talked about how to protect ourselves, both with medical and non-medical ways. So we talked about vaccinations and medicines and how they both work to cycle through our bodies and protect ourselves from sicknesses. And then we also talked about non-medical protections like sunscreen and UPF clothing, and then also respirators and hearing protection, and how these are all really useful and good things to become natural and normal in your daily life. And then finally we talked about how the impacts of personal hygiene and household cleaners, and how that is really strong. There's strong evidence to show that washing your hands is one of the fundamental ways of keeping ourselves healthy. And we talked a lot about how to do that properly and how to set yourself up for success and others around you. And then we also talked about how extending that to our food preparation, and how we need to keep our spaces clean and keep our foods separate, that we need to cook them to an appropriate temperature to make sure that they are thoroughly cooked and bacteria and viruses are killed, and that we also need to chill and so cool them appropriately fairly quickly in order to not have bacteria grow in those environments. And then also we talked about indoor air quality, and how we can prevent, how we can clean, and how we can prevent illnesses due to the quality of our air. So then Unit 4, in Lesson 13, we talked about renewable and non-renewable energy sources. So we're sort of a little bit of a switch now in Unit 4, and we were looking at fossil fuels that we depend on and are depleting rapidly. So then we looked at the renewable sources of energy that we could tap into more, and that would help us survive. So hydroelectric, which we use, but we could use more effectively and increase our amount. Solar, wind, tidal, geothermal, biomass, and hydrogen fuel cells are all things that we talked about in terms of renewable energy options. Okay, so that is all that we've done previously, and now we're going to be looking at the lessons from more recent weeks. So we have Lesson 14, which was the cost and benefits of using different energy sources. So we talked about in Lesson 13 what they were, but then we talked about the pros and cons of them. So we looked at natural gas and nuclear energy, which are both non-renewable sources of energy, but the infrastructure is set up, and you get a high energy return from them. So that is really positive in terms of we get a lot for the amount of effort that we put into it. And we're already established in terms of using these types of energy, but they have an incredibly high level of pollutants and waste, and so these have a big environmental cost, which, if we're trying to work away from that, is something to note. So then we talked about wind and hydro as renewable energy sources that could be used more. So the benefits are that there are no emissions or waste from these, so we are not polluting the environment more. But they both have large initial financial investments, and we don't get as much energy in return as fossil fuels. So it doesn't, if we're looking from a financial point of view, it doesn't feel like this is worthwhile compared to natural gas or nuclear, which we don't have to spend as much money and we get a lot back. Here we need to put a lot of money in to begin with, and we don't get as much back. So it depends on what our value system is and what we think is valuable and important. And then we talked about biofuels as a more renewable source than fossil fuels, as they are not, as we need to use other things in order to create biofuels. We need to use plants like corn and wheat, things like that. So they have less emissions in terms, some folks say. There's little to no change needed, which is maybe a positive thing, but it also, does that mean that we don't change our practices, and is that really the best way to go? But there's also the question about, is it better to use food as fuel for our vehicles and our machines than to use food as fuel for our people? And who gets to decide that, and how does that all roll? So then, looking at lesson 15, we talked about conserving energy. So instead of just using different types of energy, how can we conserve it? As that is the most beneficial way of saving energy, is by using less of it. So first we talked about just units of measurement of energy so that we could understand. And then we talked about different conservation methods. So we talked about light bulbs and how different types of light bulbs, again, might be a larger financial investment, but in the long run cost you less and also save more energy. We talked about Energy Star and the ratings for appliances, and how having Energy Star appliances, again, saves you money and uses less energy. We talked about using programmable thermostats so that you're not using heat or air conditioning when you don't need to. And so that again saves a lot of energy. And we talked about windows and how having energy efficient windows means that we keep the warmth in during the winter and we keep the warmth out during the summer, based on how those windows are designed. So then we talked about how to choose to conserve energy. So choosing renewable energy sources, so you can, through your electrical bill or however you get your power, you can say, I'd like to use renewable energy sources. I haven't been able to figure out how to do this on my own. If anybody knows how to do it, let me know. There's also government incentive programs that mean you get rebates or such when you improve the efficiency of your home. And there's the variable pricing in terms of hydro, which is new compared to in your workbook, which says it's coming. It is here now. We have variable pricing, and that it makes sense to use more electricity during the lower cost times. So in lesson 16, we're focusing on protecting the environment at work. So we talked about reduce, reuse, recycle, and recover, and how all of those 4 things in that order are another good ways to, again, conserve our energy through products. This can be done at work, but also can be done at home. And then we talked about how at work there are procedures, practices, and protocols put in place in order to protect the environment in our work environments, and to make sure people are reducing, reusing, recycling, and eventually recovering if need be, and how these procedures, practices, and protocols are put in place in order to structure this and make it more successful. And then finally, lesson 17, where we were dealing with workplace hazards. So here we talked about the different types of hazards that may be in a workplace in terms of biological, chemical, and physical hazards, and how we can minimize the risks by making sure that we are paying attention to the 2 different product symbol systems. So there's the hazardous household product symbols, and the workplace hazardous material information system, which is WHMIS, which you may have heard. which both are a system of signs and images that give you information so that you can then make decisions about how to be safe, how to store things safely, how to use products safely, and what to do if you become exposed to something. And we talked about how prevention and protection works best at the source, so it's best to stop something from being a problem at the source at the beginning. The second best is to do it along the pathway, and the third best thing is to do it with personal protection gear at the worker. Oh, we're not right. I thought it's not 17, up to 19. So 2 lessons. Lesson 18, then we talked about making buildings energy efficient. So we talked about how we can trap air in the envelope. So we need to design better envelopes so that our homes and our buildings are not releasing air and heat and energy. We talked about how there are various energy efficient appliances, motors, and heaters that work towards having either an R2000 classification or a smart home or a zero energy building classification. So all of these things are different ways to conserve energy again. And then how we can retrofit older buildings for energy efficiency, which connects to all the things that we've talked about already in terms of windows and lights and appliances, and how having energy efficient, conscious models means that we are improving our older homes. Then we talk about insulation and how insulation traps air, and which means that it keeps environments warmer or cooler depending on the season, which was new. And then the various alternative energy sources that has government incentives programs that help you to set yourself up so that you can be using other energy sources and not being on the grid. And then finally we talked about in lesson 19, so this was a switch chapter, so it's a little bit of a change, the importance of biodiversity. So we're not talking about energy conservation anymore, but talking about the impacts of biodiversity. So where we talked about community diversity, which is having the various ecosystems in our geological area, and how that creates a diverse world. So the fact that we have jungles with jungle ecosystems, or we have deserts with desert ecosystems, or we have northern like glacial areas that have glacial systems. So then we have genetic diversity, which is when we have genetic variability present within species. So this is like we talked about orca whales and how some eat seals and some eat fish, therefore they're not competing with themselves for their food. And species diversity, which is where we have a variety of species. So we have seals, and we have fish, and we have orcas, and we have herons, and we have badgers, and we have insects, and we have plants, and we have so many things that all contribute to our biodiversity, which we all work together to survive. So we talk about abiotic and biotic factors and how they are connected to each other. So abiotic being non-living factors and biotic being living factors, and how there are limiting factors within those, which means that these things cannot thrive and survive. Where we talk about the Humboldt squid, which is an invasive species that is doing really, really well due to global warming. It is, with water temperatures warming, it is able to go to more places and are wiping out aquatic animals, and really changing those ecosystems, and how that's problematic because we need a biodiversity in order for everything to do well. If something comes in and wipes everything out, then that's not going to be good overall. Whew. Again, that is a lot. We have covered a lot in this course in quite a few different areas. We still have wrapping up chapter 6, one more lesson in chapter 6, that was a very short unit, and then 3 lessons in a new chapter 7. So we still have a little bit more of a new direction to go, but that is where we are so far. So let's quickly try to go through the newer lessons, so lessons 14 through 19, to try to get a little bit of conversation going about the support questions. So first, on page 112, we had what types of pollutants are released into the air when burning fossil fuels, and give one benefit and one cost of using natural gas as a fuel source. So we talked about the benefits and costs that we talked about not today, as well as in our lesson, and releasing, we have talked about in terms of air pollution, which is a result of burning fossil fuels, and the various things that are put into the atmosphere in terms of greenhouse gases. On page 114, why are most wind farms in Ontario located near the Great Lakes? I can make assumptions in terms of wind currents and such, but I don't actually remember right off the top of my head. And then what are some benefits of hydroelectric power generation? So hydropower, what are some of the good things about it, which we again talked about today. So for the review questions on page 117, of all the methods of producing electricity in Ontario, which is the cheapest? So we didn't mention this today, but we did mention it before, that coal is the cheapest method of producing electricity. Why is it that Ontario government's trying to close all of its coal-fired power plants in 2014? So the fact that coal is the cheapest, why did the Ontario government decide to close all the plants by 2014, which they did do, seeing how now it's 2022? And then what would be the percentage increase of energy production from other energy sources if there was no coal-fired plants in 2015? So we did look about this in terms of what, so in your workbook there might be graphs that are older, but we did look at this in terms of seeing what, comparing those numbers now, that there are no coal-fired power plants in Ontario, and how that energy has been dispersed, the energy that we need has been shared among the other sources that we use. So then just more in terms of the advantages and disadvantages, talking about tailings, which we talked about in terms of nuclear waste and radon gas. Then it talks about the 4 criteria that must be met for building a wind farm, which we talked about in our lesson. And what are the positive and negative impacts, again, of hydroelectric dams, so all of the costs and benefits. This is really just getting you to reiterate all of the costs and benefits of each of these different types of fuel. So then in lesson 15, what is a good way to represent as much force as 1 Newton, and then kilowatt hours, and then joules in 1 watt. So this just goes back to understanding those units of measurement. So on page 121, what are the 2 disadvantages of using compact fluorescent light bulbs? And what is the second biggest savings that can be made in energy costs when using Energy Star appliances? Honestly, in my brain right now, I can't think what that is. So go back and look at your book and in our lesson on lesson 15. Then on page 123, describe the benefit of having a low emissive coating on a window, which we have talked about a couple of times in terms of energy efficient windows and how having that coating helps keep heat in the winter and helps reflect heat out in the summer. And then what are the benefits of having a programmable thermostat, which I mentioned earlier today, as well as in our lesson on lesson 15. How do you think your lifestyle could be affected but with time of use pricing for electricity? So this one is kind of a dated question because we already have time of use pricing. So I don't know if in all the First Nation communities, if you have time of use pricing as well. I would assume so, but we know that assuming is not a good plan. So that would be something that maybe I should look into. If anybody knows, could let me know if that is something that is actually happening in your communities, or if it's not, if you don't have the smart readers, and what happens for you, I wonder. So, but thinking about, so if you don't have time of use, then you can think about how that would affect your lifestyle, or if you do have time of use, you can think about how it has affected your lifestyle, and if you can think about how that has changed things for you. And then this just says, when is electricity the most expensive and when is the cheapest, which do it according to what the question says, according to table 4.3. So then we had an activity for you to do where you were supposed to research some Energy Guide and Energy Star appliances and look at the most energy efficient ones and their ratings, and graph that information to compare and see what information, what those ratings, how they are managing. And the review questions on page 125, where, so there's a couple of units, measurements questions, and then more light bulb questions that are very similar to what you've already asked, more time use questions that is very similar, and then why do you think Canadians use so much more energy than people in other countries, which isn't something that is necessarily something you can find explicitly in your book, but something to consider about why we use more energy than other countries in the world. So then lesson 16, what does each of the 4 R's represent? So do not just tell me reduce, reuse, recycle, and recover. You need to tell me what those words mean. So give me a sentence about what they actually mean, not just what the words are, please. And then describe 2 impacts waste has had on our society, which hopefully is pretty straightforward. Then on page 132, how is recycling different from using? So now you're comparing the 2. What are 2 types of glass that cannot be recycled? So they'll look that up in your book, in terms of general, not just in terms like here in Sioux Lookout, no glass can be recycled because we don't have a plant. And then give 2 examples of products that can be recovered, which thinking about recovery is something that I had never really thought about before. So that's something to dive into a little bit more if that's new to you. And then our review questions on page 135, which again talks about the benefits of following the 4 R's, 3 ways to reduce the amount of human waste we create. Number 3, give an example of how you could reduce waste in your life and explain the impact of this change on your lifestyle. That kind of feels like it's the same as question 2, but more personal. Describe an example of how your school reuses a product or material. So you're not in a physical school, but you could either think about your local school, or you could think about your local place of employment, or just your community in general. And then explain energy savings when recycled aluminum recycling aluminum can, compared to a brand new aluminum can. We talked about how it takes very, very little energy to recycle, to get a new can from recycled aluminum than extracting new aluminum from the earth. So identify what recycling plastic number would go on the following plastic objects. So you can either, you have access to a yogurt container, washing soap bottle, building siding, squeezable mayonnaise bottle, or a soft drink bottle. You can look on them directly, or it's something you could look up and you could probably find it online, I would assume. If you don't have one of those things, then just give me a note saying I couldn't find one of these. I tried, but if you can't find it, then just say you couldn't find it. Let me know. That's reasonable. Then talking about paper products and how they are separated and why new fibers must be added to recycling paper when it's pulped. Yeah, those are basically all. So then lesson 17, how are workplace hazards classified, which we talked about today. There's 3 classifications. And what is the best way to protect yourself when using chemicals in your workplace? And then right into the review questions. So what types of jobs would you have to protect yourself from biological hazards? So thinking about where might there be biological hazards. So I believe we talked about, there was a whole list of them when we talked about them. So give 3 examples of pathogens that a person might encounter in a job with biological work hazards.
and the 3 possible levels of certification a business can receive in Toronto after health inspection. This isn't just Toronto, we talked about it in general and how they look slightly different, but that there's 3 different things you could get on a sign that says how you're doing for your business. Then the questions moving to chemical hazards and have the difference between acute, which is short-term, immediate, and chronic, which is long-term effects are on the human body. Identify job of your choice and describe 3 physical hazards that may be present in your workplace. So there's various physical hazards that really you can, every workplace has hazards. What is the best protection about workplace hazards? We mentioned that in terms of the best is to stop it at the source, at the original place, and not let it trickle through the whole line. What does HHPS stand for? I don't remember, even though I just said it. I don't remember it so look it up. That is completely fine. But then explaining the symbols. Yeah. Then lesson 18, what percentage of all energy in Canada is used in buildings? This is something you just look up. We talked about it. And describe the 2 functions of a building's envelope. So we define an envelope, remember, that sort of casing in a house or a building to keep the heat in and the cold air out, or the cold air in and the heat out. What is the difference between heat flow through a residential home in the winter and the summer, which kind of just mentioned. What are some benefits of straw bale construction? So we talked about straw bale homes and how using straw bales for insulation. And what does it mean if a house is R2000 rated? So we talked about that in terms of an energy efficient home. And then we had activity again in this unit where we talked about where you look at various appliances that you have and you use the numbers here. You don't have to look up your own numbers, you just use the generic numbers that are here to answer these questions. And then review questions on page 153. So what are the 2 biggest differences in energy usage between residential buildings and commercial buildings? We talked about heating was a really big difference. And what is one result of a poorly designed building envelope? So if you have cracks or your building envelope is not sealed, what does that mean is going to happen? It means the heat is going to escape. A door is left open in the winter and someone says, close the door, you're letting the cold air in. And so is the statement correct? If not, what should the person really be saying? What is the benefits of having a tightly sealed building envelope around your buildings? These questions are kind of similar. I don't love them. Anyway, maybe next year they'll be different. Anyway, we'll see. We work with what we got. Talking about double glazed windows are more energy efficient than just a single pane of glass, which we've kind of talked about already in terms of window efficient glazing. Then what are the characteristics of a smart home, or what do all zero energy buildings require? So looking at different, again, energy efficient buildings. And then finally, lesson 19, list and describe 2 examples of ecological goods and services. We didn't really talk about that today, but we talked about that extensively in our lesson in terms of the benefits that we received from the natural environment. So things like pest control or pollination are goods and services that we receive based on the natural activities of plants and animals. Give examples of 2 abiotic factors and 2 biotic factors. Make sure you identify which are abiotic and which are biotic. So here you need 2 of each. That means that there should be 4 things written and you should know which one's which. And then review questions on page 161. So give 1 example of why genetic diversity is important to any species. So this really is so that you're not competing with yourself for food or habitat, things like that. What is the difference between species biodiversity and community diversity? So that's interesting to think about. Possibly tricky to word, but I believe you can do it. Describe 2 ways plants provide ecological goods and services. So again, look back and there's a whole list in your workbook. Give an example from your own experience that illustrates how abiotic and biotic factors interact. So this is going to be a personal answer in terms of what you've observed and noticed in your life. What is a limiting factor for fish living in different temperatures of water? So we talked a little bit about this in terms of where fish can survive, and how the warming of the ocean has expanded both the depth and the length of the Humboldt squid's range and the impacts of that. Identify a living thing you think will not be a global warming winner, and describe the environmental conditions that would have to change for this thing not to be a winner. That question seems like it's... I want to read it again. Identify a living thing you think will not be a global warming winner. So that means that it's going to be a global warming loser, right? And describe the environmental conditions that would have to change for this living thing not to be a winner. I feel like that question doesn't make sense. Maybe it makes sense to you. If it doesn't make sense to you, let me know. And I think to me that it should say what should change in order for the thing to be a global warming winner, because but I also don't know if being a global warming winner is a good thing, because it means that yes, you're surviving, but you're wiping out other things. So anyway, that's an oddly worded question. Dive into it, see what you think, and if you give me something, I'll probably give you marks for it. So engage in the question in some way, even though it doesn't make complete sense. Yeah, I didn't write these questions or choose them. All right, so that is our covering material up until lesson 19. So again, we have squeezed in a lot of review today, a lot of recap. I find it really useful. I hope you do as well, in terms of going back over all the material and remembering, because there has been just so much that it's like, how do you remember everything that we've covered so far? So it's really good for me, as well as for you, to go back over it. It helps to remember all those little bits and pieces. If you have any questions, particularly about any of those weird questions, support or key questions, let me know. As always, you can reach me at the office at 807-737-1488. My extension is 2209. You can leave me a message. I will get them now, and then I can return your call if that is the best way to communicate. You can also call toll-free at 1-800-667-3703. Email is my preferred method of communication, so if that works for you, go for it. My email address is bronwyn.slate, which is bronwyn.slate@nnec.owen.ca. You can also connect with me on Facebook fairly easily. My name is B. Slate Wahsa there, so feel free to reach out through Messenger if that works for you. All of our lessons are posted up on YouTube at B. Slate Wahsa is my channel there. And our lessons are all found under SVN3E, so they're all there, so that's easy place to access whichever lessons you might need. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you have a lovely day. Miigwech.